This morning, holding on, Australians teased with potential freedoms set to be announced as early as today. And we speak to a climate activist about the recent IPCC report and whether the major parties have failed Australia. It's Thursday, the 26th of August, 2021. And good morning, welcome to Press Gallery. Also this morning, coming up, the strictest lockdown in New South Wales since the pandemic began continues, with police conducting compliance checks, and the state's curfew set in earlier this week. But first, Australians are working toward reaching the 70 and 80% vaccination rates as we wait on the edge of our seats for the day we are allowed our freedoms back. This is what we're all waiting for: freedom to go to the beach, get a haircut, or go to the pub. As New South Wales sits in its 8th week of lockdown, record numbers for COVID infections were announced yesterday.
To 8 p.m, we had 919 cases of community transmission.
The Doherty report, which governments are basing their modelling on, says reopening the country is safe to do once 70 to 80% of the population has been vaccinated. New South Wales currently sits with 33% of people there fully vaccinated. The PM adamant, though, that it's up to the state premiers and chief ministers to stick to the plan for reopening.
The plan was a deal for them. It wasn't a deal with me, it was a deal with them. And that's a deal made with Australians, not with me.
The country is a fair way off double doses, reaching the 70 and 80% targets, though they are coming quickly. More announcements are expected later today. Evacuations from Afghanistan are continuing. US Marines are monitoring air traffic control from the runway of Hamid Karzai Airport. Their presence comes as the US ramps up evacuation efforts as the August 31 deadline to leave Afghanistan approaches. The UK is evacuating around 1,000 people a day. The Australian Air Force has operated 4 flights a day. Last night, 5 ADF flights carried 955 people. The total number of people evacuated since the 18th of August sits just under 2,650. The Australian government continues to work through difficult circumstances in Kabul.
There are very difficult scenes outside Hamid Karzai International Airport. People, including women and children, are waiting for days amongst crowds numbering in the thousands. Australia continues to work with partners across all aspects of the operation, and we thank them for their cooperation.
Meanwhile, the fallout from the UN's report on climate change is continuing today. The IPCC report has been dubbed a code red for humanity, revealing there is a narrow path to avoiding a climate catastrophe, and it may be our final warning. Earlier, Leonardo Puglisi caught up with the activist Daniel Bleakley to get his thoughts and ask whether he thinks the major parties have failed Australia.
It is unequivocal that human activities are responsible for climate change.
Code red for humanity.
Code red for humanity. Code red for humanity.
Code red for humanity. Woo!
Climate change is now rapid, widespread, and intensifying. That is according to a devastating report by the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which warns that many human-caused effects are now irreversible.
Along with a number of climate activists, I was quite depressed after listening to the summary of the report. For a lot of people in the movement, the IPCC was reporting or stating things that a number of us had already known for some time, which is that it's now become urgently critical that we act on the climate crisis. But to hear it from the IPCC, it was definitely quite traumatic to hear that, and yeah, to be honest, I was quite depressed for at least a week after that to try to process it and absorb it. Yeah.
Have the two major parties here in Australia failed at tackling climate change in the recent decade or so?
Absolutely. I think both the Liberal Party and the Labor Party have utterly failed Australians in addressing the climate crisis. I think because they both take donations from the fossil fuel industry, both Labor and the Liberal Party and the Nationals take donations from coal, oil and gas companies. They are utterly beholden to the fossil fuel industry. And if that is the case, which it is, then essentially the fossil fuel industry has hijacked Australia's democracy. The vast majority of Australians want strong, urgent action on the climate crisis, and we just aren't getting that from either of the major parties.
In your opinion, which of the parties, and that not just out of the major parties, minor parties, the Greens, Australian Democrats, Australian Progressives, which of them, in your opinion, has the best climate policies, or at least has the best views on climate change from what we've seen, even just on social media?
Yeah, I think definitely the Greens have the strongest climate policy, which is net zero by 2030, which is totally achievable. There are also a number of independent candidates who have very good climate policies. To be honest, I believe that the Greens don't even go far enough. I think that we could be net zero by 2025. There's nothing stopping us. There's no technology constraints or economic constraints stopping us from getting to net zero by 2025. The transition can happen much faster than we're led to believe. The Liberal Party, and to a large extent the Labor Party, tries to frame this as a transition that will need to take decades. But the truth is that if we mobilise and we accelerate the transition, we can do it in a couple of years. But underneath it all, what's happening is the fossil fuel industry is trying to preserve their profits, and they are essentially suppressing the renewable and electric vehicle revolution.
Next week, we'll have part 2 of our interview with Daniel Bleakley and discuss how the media has been covering climate change. And at 6 News, we want to hear what you have to say. You can join the conversation on Twitter using hashtag 6NewsAU. Next week, we'll share your thoughts on Australian politics. If you have any questions or anything you'd like us to dive into, head to our website, 6newsau.com, and contact us. Queensland has closed its borders to new arrivals for 2 weeks after facilities were becoming overwhelmed by the number of people trying to move to the state, which has no current lockdowns.
Have a look out in Queensland at the moment. You can go to work, you can go to school, you can go watch sport, you can play community sport, you can go to a restaurant, you can go out. We haven't given up.
It comes as New South Wales and Victoria struggle through their extended lockdowns due to escalating outbreaks and record-setting rates of infection. The New South Wales government's electric vehicle strategy is aiming to increase sales by more than 50% by 2030. Legislation is due to be put before Parliament when it resumes in September. Purchasers of new electric cars will be able to claim rebates worth $3,000 and refunds on stamp duty if the legislation passes. If it is, only the first 25,000 will be eligible for the rebate. And that is Press Gallery for this week. Thank you so much for your company. Leo will have 6 News this Sunday from 8 p.m, so join him for that. I'm Christian Penny. I hope you have a great day.